It ain't no fun when the rabbit got the shank. And that's what happened on Easter Sunday in Lucasville Prison, Ohio in 1993. The Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Gangster Disciples, and the Black Muslims all got a hold of the shanks. And they took the entire prison L block hostage, including all the officers who were there that day. And they flipped the entire Department of Corrections in Ohio upside down on the day that most kids were trying to flip the grass, looking for Easter eggs with little treats in it. Well, the inmates in Lucasville, they were flipping their own eggs. They were scrambling their own eggs, and it wasn't the kind that the warden was going to want to hear that day. And from what I understand, the warden was at home having Easter Sunday meal with his family when he got the phone call that his prison was underneath the control of the rabbits. And the rabbits had the knives, and the rabbits had the bats, makeshift weapons of every kind that you can imagine. There's no shortage of information about the Lucasville prison riot. But deciphering and sorting through it all to find out what the exact truth is, that's another task at hand. And almost like a rabbit going down a rabbit hole, no pun intended, right? Rabbit ears. You can go down that rabbit hole and you can wind up anywhere, in any direction. Because when you try to chase the rabbits that are running from Lucasville prison, you don't know where they're going to lead you to. The slaughter, the truth, or more lies. Today on The Pen and the Shank, we talk about Easter Sunday from Lucasville, or in the eyes of Lucasville prison and prisoners. As we lead up to Easter Sunday, rabbit ears and all, welcome to The Pen and the Shank, the most unusual and unique crime and prison channel experience on YouTube, where we're going to talk about the Lucasville prison riot, Easter Sunday, that the world will never forget, especially the Department of Corrections in Ohio and any one of the inmates who were involved in that prison riot. Let's get it. Easter Sunday, Lucasville prison riot of 1993. How did we get here? Well, I'll tell you how we got here. It all goes back to 1972 when Lucasville prison was first built. As you know, that during the 1970s, all throughout the United States of America, prisons were being built everywhere. It's almost like there was a harbinger of knowledge that the Department of Corrections and the governments knew that we didn't know was going to lead into the 1990s and the 1980s, when crime would skyrocket all throughout the United States of America. And Ohio was no exception, as they built another prison in preparation. But what they didn't prepare for is as much information as they knew. They could not know that the prisons that they would build would not be enough to house all the people that they would incarcerate. And that's how we get to Lucasville, 1993 on Easter Sunday. Overcrowding. The prison was overcrowded and tempers were boiling over because the prison was about to execute Order 66 with tuberculosis testing. And the Black Muslims got word that tuberculosis testing had alcohol involved in it. And part of their beliefs, according to the Quran, was they could not have alcohol in their system. I don't know the specific religious implications according to the Quran, as it conspires with their complaint. But I do know that they said that they didn't want the tuberculosis testing. Now, hear me out. If a man don't want to be tested, a man don't want to be tested. But also a man shouldn't be in prison. So there's that as well. So word gets around the prison that the Ohio Department of Corrections is going to do this tuberculosis testing, and the Black Muslims aren't happy about it. They start complaining and bickering and saying that they're not going to do it and they're going to buck against the system. Word gets back to the Department of Corrections that there's this possibility of something occurring. Well, they never could have predicted exactly what did occur on Easter Sunday that day, but there were telltale signs, and the warden wouldn't find out till after a couple days after the riot actually happened that some of the officers actually witnessed the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Muslims, and the Black Gangster Disciples all on the yard congregating together in discussion. That's right, you had three prison organizations that usually don't mix with one another, all talking together peacefully. And there were prison guards from the gun towers who witnessed this, and nobody reported to the warden. That was one of the warden's biggest complaints of, Lucasville in 1993 when this riot happened. It was like, dang, nobody told me that this is something you're supposed to tell the warden. This is the red alert goes off. Order 66 about to be executed when the Aryans and the blacks start congregating together, you know something's about to go down. It ain't going to be good for us. And that's exactly what happened. But I want to take a moment to stop. Let's go back a little bit to 1990 inside Lucasville prison. There was a specific incident, and Lucasville was not short of inmate violence and inmate on inmate shankings and unalivings and staff brutality. It had all the regular complaints that come with United States prisons. But there was one specific incident that stands out to me as I do the research on Lucasville prison. And it was in 1990 when a teacher, a woman who used to work inside the prison named Beverly Jo Taylor, and she was just a teacher, she taught in the prison, was followed by an inmate, Eddie Vaughn, into the restroom where that's what he did to her. He took her life inside the bathroom. And this is a picture of Miss Taylor. And it's unfortunate she lost her life, because what's unfortunate is that the prison realizes the prison has a problem when something like this happens. When this woman, who's not a correctional staff worker, she's a teacher, she's there to help inmates get educated. She's there to teach inmates how to, read and write and give them the basic skills that they need so they can get a job when they get out of prison. And instead, you get a savage like Eddie Vaughn who follows her into the restroom and takes her life. I think the inmates of the prison should be attacking dudes like Eddie Vaughn who did that to this woman. Instead, they turn their attention to the staff. And listen, there's something that goes on inside prisons. Yes, there is mistreatment of staff. I've witnessed it firsthand. There are crooked guards and crooked police officers. There's no way around it. That exists. It's always going to exist. But what happened in Lucasville was a tragedy all around, because I think the warning signs were there. And the prison was largely understaffed at the time of the incident. It was also Easter Sunday. On Easter Sunday, a lot of people want to be off and they don't want to be at prison because everybody has holiday plans. And, most of the staff, especially your captains, your warden, your assistant wardens and all that, they probably all had plans and they all probably took off. And some of your staff take off, and then you got to fill in those slots. And some people don't show up because they call in sick, because that's the way work works, and prison staff ain't no different. So the place is understaffed. But make no mistake about it, the prisoners found out and got word that there was going to be tuberculosis testing, even if the black Muslims didn't like it. And one thing in all prisons is that in prisons, prisoners are used for labor in everything. And so when prisoners are taking out the trash, when prisoners are mopping the floors, when prisoners are handing books to and from place to place, when prisoners are delivering packages for staff from one place to the next, they're going to hear stuff. And if they hear stuff, they're going to speak. They're going to share what they're hearing. Well, there was a specialized person who came on board to help, quell the possible tensions that were rising behind the tuberculosis testing. He came up with a plan that we're going to wait till the Monday after Easter Sunday. We're going to lock the prison down. We're going to go from cell to cell. We're going to do the tuberculosis testing, and we'll get most of the testing done. And whoever doesn't do it, we'll just lock them in admin, and then we'll get to it when we get to it. That way we kept any problems from happening. Well, the inmates found out, and word got back to the black Muslims. And I'm assuming at this point, that's when at some point or another, the black Muslims talked to the Aryan Brotherhood and the black gangster disciples. And they said, look, Easter Sunday is going down. And when you listen to the stories and you read the stories that were told about that Easter Sunday, it was almost like there was this uncanny calm upon the prison that led up to the actual riot itself. What's crazy about it, as uncanny and calm as it was, and the officers themselves tend to say it was kind of eerily calm that day, but we didn't think anything was going to happen. Little did they know, the inmates were about to take control of the entire L block at Lucasville prison. And that's what happened. Just as quickly as the inmates were doing their daily activities on a normal Easter Sunday, which happens in prison. In prison, there's baseball, basketball, football, sports, boxing, exercising on the yard, chit-chatting on the yard, playing cards. There are things that inmates do to pass time. And times like Easter, it's not uncommon to have a baseball game going on. Well, when they handed out the baseball bats, instead of going to the baseball diamond, the inmates went straight to the officer and they took control of the key. They beat the first officer down. All the information that I've read and that I can find on Lucasville prison riot says that within hours of the initial contact of the riot, where the inmates made first contact with attacking a correctional officer, they had 12 hostages in hand, and they had the entire L block underneath their control. By this time, the state police are notified. And if you know anything about the state police dispatch pretty quickly, and the state police get to Lucasville prison. They surround the prison. At this time, the state police and the Department of Corrections take control of the remaining wings of the prison so that those wings don't fall underneath the control of the actual riot. The riot was segregated completely to the L block unit of the prison, and it consisted of about 400 and something inmates that were involved in the actual riot. Well, when the riot took place and the convicts took control of L block, they instantly started chattering over the radios and put out a sign with sheets that said, "We have the keys." That's right. They had the keys, not just to the yard, but they had the keys to the whole L block. They took over Lucasville prison. So now the warden's coming, he's not happy, and they have a full-scale riot and crisis on their hand. By this time, you know, the media's there. They starting to show up, people starting to ask questions, and it's starting to go over the radio, and it's starting to get all over the news. So on April 13th, 1993, it's a Tuesday. At this point, the prison systems leadership decided that cutting power and cutting water to the prison was the next best step. At this point, they already had 5 bodies on their hand. That's right. Instantly, old vendettas that inmates had against one another. I'm assuming that the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Gangster Disciples, and the Black Muslims, they had personal vendettas against certain individuals. So the shot callers made the decision that certain people had to be taken out. And that's exactly what happened. So they threw those bodies out. So the prison systems, Department of Corrections, state police, they cut power and they cut water. And if you know anything about anything, if you cut power and cut water to something, it's eventually going to lead to that organization or that something getting weaker. And that's exactly what they were hoping. But these inmates had resolve, and they could not have predicted that this prison riot was going to go on for 11 days. 11 days these dudes held it steady. You know what I mean? From what I understand, each group, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Gangster Disciples, and the Black Muslims all had their individual wing inside of L Block. So in each one of the wings that each one of those organizations had, they each took turns housing the different hostages inside their wing. So, you know, for 1 or 2 days, the Aryan Brotherhood would have this set of hostages. And then the next few days, they would trade it to the Black Gangster Disciples, and they would switch hostages. So the hostages were never able to get comfortable with any one group of inmates because the different organizations were trading the hostages back and forth as to throw the hostages off guard and not to let anybody get comfortable. What happens is that they decide to start negotiating. And when they start negotiating, the leaders for these organizations go out to do the negotiating. And when they go out to do the negotiating, what do you think happens? Well, their faces all over the cameras, and their names are plastered on every screen and every TV all over America in the 1990s, 1993. For whatever technology we had at that time, we had cameras of the media, and it was live footage. And so these dudes who were doing the negotiating, specifically what they call the Lucasville 5, and they were on the thumbnail. I'm going to put a picture of them here, and we'll discuss them as we go throughout, because the entirety of the trial that happens eventually at the conclusion of the Lucasville prison riot mainly focuses on these 5 individuals, as they deem these 5 individuals the ringleader of the actual riots. Something I want to add is that the prisoners who were leading the Lucasville prison riot, though there are 5 that gets the credit often for the riot itself, there was a lot of individuals later that come to light that share information that's really interesting. There's one individual on a Netflix series, and he mentions the fact that he remembers reading the prison riot documentary, or not documentary, he didn't watch it, he read it, book documenting what happened in the Attica prison riot in 1979 in New York. And in that riot, if you know anything about anything, the state police caused more casualties than the inmates ever could have, because the state police and the Department of Corrections in New York went into Attica prison, boom, 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 guns ablazing, because they had it on their mind. Let's be real. If we're being real, let's be real. They were sitting there like, Dang, I can't wait to get it. We're going to shoot one of these boys. We're going to blast them. We're going to knock them all through. I got my 30-yard six. I can't wait to get in there and get to blasting. And that's exactly what they did. They went into Attica prison and they went to blasting. And they shot their own people. Friendly fire killed more people in Attica prison riot than the actual inmates did. And so the inmates inside Lucasville, they were privy to this. And they knew that there was a chance that any given moment that the Ohio Department of Corrections and the Ohio State Police were going to come in there guns a-blazing. They had asked the prisoners who were leading the riot in negotiations, send in the FBI. Well, the FBI, they came to Lucasville, but they didn't get involved yet. They were supplying with information to the Department of Corrections and to the Ohio State Police, but they weren't taking control of the prison as it wasn't a federal prison. It was a state prison. So the feds were just there to offer their assistance, But make no mistake, as each day's dragging by, the inmates who are involved in this riot are realizing there's a chance that they are not going to make it out of here alive. And you got to keep in mind, too, of the 400 and some inmates who were involved in this riot, some of them didn't have any knowledge that this riot was going to go down like this, and they didn't want nothing to do with it. Not everybody that was there wanted to take part in it. I promise you that it's recorded. But some of the inmates, just had to get through it. And so they had to do what they had to do to survive. And so here's one thing to take note of, too. The inmates weren't stupid. They kept the correctional officers as hostage. They just unalived the snitches and I'm guessing the people who had those bad charges, against kids or whatever. And they didn't harm the guards. It wasn't until they got word that the news media and Department of Corrections in Ohio was not taking them serious. They actually took the life of the first officer, and that officer's name was Robert Vallingham. And Robert Vallingham, he, on all accounts, was tossed out a window, and it was captured on live coverage when they tossed his body out the window and his body thumped and hit the ground. And his wife was heartbroken. She was across the street in a gymnasium. That's where all the family members of the prison guards who were hostage and all the community were across the street from the prison in the school gymnasium watching the whole event unfold. And she said she knew that it was her husband. Sometimes you just know when somebody leaves this earth and you're not there. It's an uncanny thing, and I've heard many stories where people's like, I just knew so-and-so was gone, and they didn't know, but they knew, and she knew, and that was her husband, Robert Villingham's body. And there's multiple accounts of inmates, even in the Netflix documentary, where a white inmate and a black inmate both confessed that when they found out that it was Robert Villingham who was unalived, that they were like, dang, they actually took a good one, and all accounts say that he was a good correctional officer. I was in prison. There are correctional officers, and what you mean by when an inmate says that a correctional officer is a good correctional officer, what they mean is that the dude does his job. Ain't no convict got no problem with no officer who's doing his job. The problem occurs is when those officers are involved in extracurricular activity. You know what I mean? Giving you a punch in the chest. Hitting you in the gut behind the camera, holding your mail longer than they should, not giving you your dessert on your tray, talking about that's the way the tray came. And everybody got their dessert, or not giving you your tray, or not giving you your phone call. That's called extracurricular activity. Not giving you your rec time. See, they're playing mental games with you. And inmates and convicts, they realize this. And they're like, nah, that ain't how you're supposed to do it. Now, when an officer shows up and he just does his job, ain't nobody gonna hold him as a bad officer because they understand he got a job to do and he got bills to pay too, so they're gonna respect that. That's respect. It just so happens that Officer Robert Villingham, he was one of the good ones. And from what one inmate says is that he believes the reason they chose him to take his life first is that the shot callers who were involved in everything knew that he saw what initially kicked off the riot, and he saw all the initial shot callers who kicked it off. So he saw too much, so he had to go. So it was possible that, Robert Villingham, officer, he lost his life because he seen too much at the beginning and they realized they had to take him out, even though he was a good one. There's another correctional officer who admits at the end that his initial thought was, I want to hurt any, and this was one of the hostages, that he wanted to hurt any inmate he can get his hands onto. See, that's bad thinking. See, he was shell-shocked from what he just went through, but the whole reason the riot kicked off was behind that kind of officer's thought process, that he wanted to take it out on him. So now he's going to go work at another prison And he's going to be around other inmates that didn't have nothing to do with nothing. And he's going to take it all out on them. You see what I mean? It can go sideways quick. And there was a warning at the end where they wrote all over the walls, like you could see, where the Aryan Brotherhood on their wing of the wall, there's actual footage of them drawing swastikas with AB drawings and all that. And then, and there's even there's one writing that's really, really portentous where it says blacks and whites united. That's right. The blacks and the whites in the prison don't usually unite, but they were united under one umbrella for the purpose of getting justice. You know what I mean? And the whites stood with the Muslims. And I don't think it was just about tuberculosis testing, because that sounds kind of ridiculous to me, because I've known many Muslims who drink alcohol, drink it. If I go around the corner where the Arabs got a little shop, they smoking hookah and drinking alcohol. So I think it was much more than that. Now, when people get in prison, they play mental games too, and the Muslims ain't no exception. They not prim and proper, sitting on top the perfect hill of do no wrong. They don't sit there neither. They hypocrites just like everybody else. And so they might have used that as an excuse. And so some of the shot callers are really smart, and they play those mental manipulation games. And, so they get in the minds of the younger, weaker inmates who can't think for themselves, and they tell them, oh, this is against the Quran. We got to go against this. You know what I mean? But I think there's a lot of other things that the dudes could be fighting for. And if they would have been clear about it, I don't think it was just about tuberculosis testing that had to do with alcohol. It was about the mistreatment of inmates. They had a 21 thesis that they wrote, and they had the warden and the governor's sign of Ohio saying that they would oblige by this if they met these 21 demands, that they would end the hostage negotiations and they would surrender. So the shot callers and the inmates that were participating in the riot knew at some point or another this had to come to a conclusion. And it wasn't necessarily going the way they wanted at this time. And a lot of them were really concerned that at some point or another it was going to be the Wild Wild West. It was going to be like the OK Saloon. It was going to be guns a-blazing, and none of them had guns. At that point, the rabbit with the shank wasn't going to do nothing against the rabbit with the gun. And the rabbits with the guns were itching to get inside that L block so they could take out these rabbits with the shanks. And so the rabbits with the shanks, they got to the news cameras, and they asked the news cameras for a specific attorney named Mickey Schwartz. Now, imagine Mickey Schwartz. He's an attorney, and he's in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he gets a phone call. I'm sure maybe at this point he heard about the prison riot, and he gets a phone call and it says, hey, look, Mickey. And he's like, what's up, man? And they're like, the inmates inside the prison riot, the shot callers, they're asking for you. And Mickey's like, cool, put him on the phone. And Mickey flies in. They put a table in between the prison fences, and Mickey's sitting on one side. The correctional staff and the negotiators completely move out the way, and Mickey's talking to one of the shot callers from the Aryan Brotherhood, and I think a shot caller from the Muslims and the Gangster Disciples. And he talks to them, and they show him the 21 thesis that they wrote, that the governor signed and the warden signed. And they asked Mickey Schwartz, who's now representing, so he's going to be representing the inmates. That's who they want to be their mouthpiece. And they says, hey, Mickey, is this binding? And Mickey says, no way. No way is this binding. He said, I guarantee you that this is not a binding contract. It's signed under duress while y'all have hostages. They don't have to abide by this. So he's staring straight with him, and they trust in Mickey Schwartz. You know what I mean? And but he tells them, and he's trying to steer straight with everybody because he wants to see this. Mickey Schwartz doesn't want to see nobody hurt. So he's actually a mouthpiece who can help end this riot and get these hostages out. And so he says, look, I'm going to stand on y'all behalf to make sure that y'all get better treatment. And from what the warden and the Department of Corrections in Ohio is telling me right now, they're going to abide by this 21 thesis statement that y'all want. You know what I mean? So he's saying they're telling me they're going to abide by it, but they don't have to, And so one of the last things that the inmates asked for was the media to come. They needed cameras everywhere. They demanded cameras everywhere because they remembered, and they were in there discussing on what happened in Attica. They also had their hands, because they took over the entire prison in L Wing, they had their hands on all the manuals on how to run prisons during riots and everything else. And the shot callers and all the intellectuals who were in prison with them were reading these manuals, and they knew that their time, they were on limited time. That even though they took over this wing, and even though they had already unalived at this point 10 people, including one officer, they were on limited time, and the system was going to come back and take control. It was just a matter of when, and they knew that anybody who was going to be standing up was going to get bloom, boom. These dudes were done. They wasn't going to be able to stand against the might of the rabbits with the guns. And they even said that they knew it was going to be so bad when the Department of Corrections or State Police decided to take the prison back, that they actually had war vets who were inmates in there and dudes who served in Vietnam. I tell y'all stories all the time about dudes who I done time with who went in Vietnam. And sometimes people think I'm telling crazy stories, but I'm telling y'all the truth. And it's proof that in the Lucasville prison riot, the dudes who were in Vietnam helped build makeshift devices and explosives. So when the officers came in there, they might go off. And they set up beds and barricades everywhere, kind of like when they were in Vietnam and they had to go through the Viet Cong. You know what I mean? This is real stuff. There was coming up in the 90s, going to prison in the 1980s, 1990s. There was a lot of dudes from Vietnam in there. And they have some stories. And well, dudes from Vietnam were in there during Lucasville, and they helped the shot callers set up perimeters that when the place got stormed, they were going to be able to stand a chance and not get unalived. Anyway, it never did come to that. They eventually agreed to start, letting everybody go. The last people to leave outside the prison were actually the hostages with a few inmates, and it ended peacefully. Nobody got unalived. And at this point, the Department of Corrections has to hold somebody accountable, and society is demanding somebody be held accountable, specifically for the death of Officer Robert Villingham, to, bring justice to what happened to him. And they focused on what we now call, and the world now knows as the Lucasville Five. And those individuals are Bamami Shakur, also known as Keith Lamore, and he was born on May 31st, 1969. He's on death row and he's scheduled for execution on January 13th of 2027. Then you have Sadiq Abdullah Hassan, who's also known as Carlos A. Sanders. He was born on January 4th, 1963, and he's also on death row for the death of Correctional Officer Robert Villingham. Jason Henry Robb, who was born on June 15, 1967, is also on death row. And then you have George W. Skates. He's on death row. He was born in 1946, March 29th. And you have Namir Abdul Mateen James Ware, and he was born on January 20th, 1957. He is also on death row for the death of Correctional Officer Robert Villingham. All five of these individuals are still alive. I believe it's likely that we see the execution of at least one or two of these guys before they start dying of natural causes. They are up there in age, specifically George W. Skates. He is the only one, from what I understand, who's not being housed at the same location as the other four. And his health is deteriorating daily. He has been fighting his case, saying that the whole time, he was the one, they called him Big Cheese of the Aryan Brotherhood, George Skates. And he claims that he had nothing to do with the death of Officer Villingham. All five of these individuals say they didn't have anything to do with it. I personally question if any one of these five actually physically were the ones who took the life of Officer Robert Villingham. The reason I question that is because it was a riot. There was a lot going on. And what proof do you have other than informants? And that's exactly what happens. Out of all the other inmates, almost 4 or 5 dozen individuals took plea agreements and plea deals to turn state's evidence against these 5 individuals. So in the end, all 5 of these dudes had almost 5 dozen of their homeboys turn state's evidence against them, because their homeboys like, we ain't going to death row and we still want to get out. And so that's what happened. And when the state had their mind made that they was going to do it to these 5 individuals, and these 5 individuals were the ones that were specifically involved in the negotiations. Here's the thing. What if in the future there's another prison riot, and just like these inmates remembered what happened in Attica, another prison riot's going to remember what happened in Lucasville, and they're going to say, nah, you don't want to be the one doing the negotiating, because when this riot comes to a close, whoever the negotiator is going to be the one that takes the proverbial sword. He's going to be the one that they send to death row and they accuse for being the ringleader. Maybe, just maybe, the negotiators were the ones inside the jail and talking to the staff and talking to the media, trying to keep everything calm and trying to de-escalate everything. I don't know. I wasn't there. Welcome to the Pen and the Shank, the most unusual and unique crime and prison channel experience on YouTube. Give me a like and subscribe. And if you like this story, I got a lot more coming. This is a really in-depth, detailed story. I can talk about it more. We'll cover it again. I hope you liked it. Share in the comments. Do you think that the Lucasville 5 deserve the death penalty? And do you think justice will ultimately be carried out for the death of Officer Robert Vallingham? And do you also consider the fact that there were also 9 other inmates, no matter what those inmates' charges were, they were still inmates and they still had a voice and they still had a life and they still had family who loved them. They're no longer with us and you never hear anything about them. I don't know what their charges were. Maybe they were just snitches. Maybe they did something that people didn't like. But at the end, they weren't sentenced to death and they received death by the hands of their fellow peers inside the prison. Man, give me a like and subscribe. Let's get this.